Jefferson Robbins with NCWLIFE. I'm here in the Palisades in Douglas County. Molly Linville, owner, operator of KV Ranch. Molly, thanks for letting me come out.
Oh, absolutely. It's a pleasure to have you here.
We spent some time today going over your spread here. I helped with the fence.
You did.
This was a big deal for me. But tell me how you came to KV Ranch, how it came to be your baby, and what kind of, start off by saying what kind of situation was it in when you found it, when you came to it?
Sure. So this ranch has been in my husband's family for over 105, 6 years, somewhere in there. And my husband's father was running it, and he had kind of always said to us that he wasn't going to leave the ranch to us, and that he was going to donate it to Nature Conservancy. And so, we were fine with that. That was his choice to make. And we were both working for U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service at the time. And he got sick, unfortunately, suddenly, and passed away rather quickly. And lo and behold, he had left the whole ranch to us. And so, we both had federal jobs, which means, we had things like health insurance and paid leave and all those kind of things. And we had to decide overnight whether we were going to become cattle ranchers or not. And I was a resounding yes, and my husband was a resounding no, because, he is raised here and he knew how much work this was going to be. And so when we got here, there was about 120 head of cows and their calves. And, his father had been in his 80s and he hadn't had a hired hand for a long time. So there was just a lot of broken infrastructure in place. And so I don't know if it was from being a wildlife biologist or what, but I just immediately took to the cattle. I'm one of these people who I'm generally sort of like a B student with everything, and I have to work really hard for everything I learn. And I'm just, not a ton of stuff comes natural to me, and the cattle just came super naturally to me right away. And so I was enamored at day 2. and so I knew I was never leaving after that. And what we ended up doing is my husband agreed to quit work for a couple of years and come help me sort of repair all that broken infrastructure that was on the ranch. And then he was clear that he was going back to an off-farm job after that. And so that's what we did. And really those 2 years got the basics put back together. I would say it took a decade to get it really operational again. Once things break, it's very expensive, and it's just a lot of hard work. And I was still just even learning cattle, and I come from a dryland farm, and so the irrigation was all new to me, and so I had to learn the learning curve was steep when I got here, for sure.
And KV Ranch is a name that goes back in your family's history, yes?
Yeah, so KV is Carl Victor, which was my husband's grandfather. He came here in the late 1800s and really started putting this ranch together in around 1918. And so my husband never knew him. He died at like 62 years of age before my husband came along. There's a few people in the area that knew him, and it's always fun to hear about him. But he was, I believe, quite a character. He was a really great artist, and he built our house, and it's a beautiful little house. And we have all of his drawings and paintings. And he put this ranch together parcel by parcel. As homesteaders went out of business, he paid the taxes that were owed on the place and got ownership that way. And so over time, but he had a lot of foresight in 2 areas. He laid claim to water that came out of the ground before water rights were even a thing. So I would love to know how he knew to do that. I mean, I'm sure water rights were starting to, come into, perspective, but especially when they're so important out here. And so he hand dug a 300-foot deep well through the basalt, which I think is pretty amazing. and shows that he was tougher than we'll ever think of being.
Now, basalt is not dirt, so we're clear about this. This is a form of rock, and it's pretty tough.
Yes, I will say he had a deep love for dynamite, so I'm sure that hand digging also had to do with that. And I can't remember the dimensions, but it's sort of like, I'm going to say it's about 10 feet by 6 feet. So, he probably did some blasting and then pulled the tailings out of that. Like, I'm not sure he was the most honest broker ever. Like, I mean, by today's standards, right? Like, we have an ad where he had 100 broke saddle horses for sale. And I always wonder, where did he get 100 broke saddle horses? And I don't know, but, so it was just a different time. And you had to literally be that tough to stay standing. And, if I had been, and I was raised on, on a farm where you had to be pretty tough too, but I don't know if I was transported back in time, if I would be tough enough to do what he did to put this place together. The other place where he was really thought ahead was he really had a relationship with what is now the Confederated Tribes of the Colvilles, which at that time it would have been the Moses Coulee band, the Moses Columbia, band of what's now the Colvilles, and always sort of had a working relationship with that tribe that was displaced from this area. And I'm always grateful for that because my husband's father carried on that relationship. We did too. It's sort of petered out a little bit, unfortunately. I think it's on us to rekindle that relationship with the Colvilles. But that's a tough thing to know that you've displaced the peoples from an area, and how do you go forward in an honest, thoughtful way from there? And I'm grateful that he, cultivated that relationship, and because it's a tough nut to know how to crack, I think.
Well, describe KV Ranch. What kind of landscape are you operating in?
Yeah, so we're in the Moses Coulee, which if you haven't been out here, people should come and take an explore. You could end up at Banks Lake or other places, and so this is the most westerly flood of Lake Missoula, and so we have 800-foot basalt cliffs on either side of us, and it's shrub steppe habitat. We also have 270 acres of irrigated farm ground in the bottom, and that's where our house here is located. And I don't know if I said it, the ranch is about 6,000 acres, which is plenty. And so our precipitation out here is we get about 9 to 12 inches of rain. So water is always going to be our limiting factor out here.
Describe your average day on the ranch.
During the growing season, I have all the cattle on the irrigated ground. It's all in perennial pasture, and I do rotational grazing. And so the cattle get moved every day, once a day, into a new fresh area of grass. And then that spot gets rested for at least, it's usually between 30 and 40 days before the cattle are back to it. And so I do that. I have a milk cow that I milk. Actually, I have more than one milk cow that I milk. And I've also got her sort of in my milk cows. I have them calve in the springtime so that they're eating the good fresh grass. It makes the milk delicious. And then I just milk for a couple of months and then freeze enough milk for the rest of the year so that those cows can dry off and they're not working all the time and they get a break. And so I do that. There's a lot of irrigation to change, and that's part of my to-do most days. And then a lot of it is repairing whatever the cattle broke. So, fencing, as we went and did some this morning, and you just never know what it's going to be. And then this is true, I think, for all agriculture, it's all the things that pop up that you weren't expecting to have happen. And that could literally be anything. And that you just have to run out and deal with, and then you have to readjust your rest of your day after that. We get things like, oh, people trespassing, and maybe that's not such a big deal, but maybe they're trespassing where there's something dangerous and we don't want them to get hurt, and so I'll have to go out there and contact them. Or a broken water pipe is always in the possibilities. And but yeah, you just never really know. I start out with a punch list every morning, and sometimes it gets filled out and completed, and sometimes one item is done and the rest of the day gets wrecked. So you just never know.
Now, the ranch came with its own cattle when you started.
Yeah.
You've sort of changed the way you handle cattle on your ranch. So we have a number of herds here right now, but they're not all your herds.
Yeah, right. So, and actually, my husband's dad he was sort of the real deal, as I like to say, and his cattle were actually a little too, as I might say, woofy for me. They were pretty hardcore and a little bit dangerous to be around. And so I actually sold a lot of his cattle because at that time, I could handle them now that I know what I'm doing, but I couldn't handle them at that time. So I bought and raised my own cows, and put together a really nice herd that I'm really proud of. But I had a hip injury, and suddenly it became very clear to me that I needed, that's every day of the year I'm busy, and when I'm busted up, that's pretty hard to do. And so I made the change. I sold most of my cattle, and I'm now custom grazing for other people on this place. That was hard for me. Like I said, I was really proud of my cattle, and I had worked with them a lot to rekindle their herding instincts, and I rotationally grazed them out on the range ground, and handled them a lot. And so it was hard to say goodbye to them, for sure. But now I've got custom grazing cows, and they go home to their home ranches. Sorry about my dog there. They go home to their home ranches in the winter, and so I have some time off in the winter now, and that's nice.
One of the things that you tried to do when you took over this ranch over a period of a number of years was to try to reconstitute the health of the soil.
Yep.
So tell me what you saw in the way the soil was operating here, and what kind of results did you try to achieve?
Yeah, so some of that, it was from, sort of my scientific curiosity about soils, and some of it was literally from economics. And so we, at that time, were farming the irrigated ground pretty traditionally. We were mostly raising alfalfa hay, and when we first got here, we actually had a farmer who was doing the farming for us, and did a great job, and no complaints there. But it was, it was inputs like fertilizer and herbicides, and that gets really expensive. And when when it costs, I'm just throwing these numbers out, they're not quite right, but when it costs you $120 to put a ton of hay up, and you only get $150 for that ton of hay when you sell it, pretty soon those economics aren't working for you anymore. And also the equipment's really expensive, and it was something I just didn't really enjoy, the farming, even though I come from a farming background. That part of it wasn't my thing, and the cattle were. And so I had to just figure out what I was going to do. And so I have turned those they're under pivot irrigation circles into perennial pastures. And so what that means is I don't have to use any of those chemical inputs anymore, and because the cattle are doing all the work, right? Like, they're fertilizing with their manure and urine, and they're doing all the harvesting for me. And so that was sort of the economic reason for doing that. But then it was like I started reaping the benefits of that. And so I could see that the ground was looking better and better based on the health of the grass and just how much grass was out there. And I knew I was using less water and no inputs, and so I really had to start reading about soil. And as soon as I started reading about soil, I just completely got excited about it, because there's this whole world that's going on in the soil, and it's all symbiotic relationships with, and it's like all this biodiversity under the ground. And it's so the plants are, through the photosynthesis process, are making carbohydrates and sugar, and that feeds those microorganisms in the soil, and those microorganisms are doing all the, bringing nutrients to the plants. And there's, predators and prey under there, and they have this whole world that's going on. And the end result is, you know, those plants, that it's so important for them to be healthy, they're the ones that are getting the carbon out of the atmosphere, because that's what the plants breathe, and then they turn around and give us oxygen back. And one thing about that that's really important is we kind of talk about carbon like it's a bad word, and it's not that. We're made up of so much carbon, and the atmosphere is made up of so much carbon. It's the building block of life, right? So we need it. So carbon's not a bad word. It's just the proportions and where in the cycle is that carbon sitting. And regardless of how people feel about climate change, we know that we have too much carbon in the atmosphere. We have other greenhouse gases in the atmosphere too, that we know that if we could get those out of the atmosphere and back in the soil where the plants can actually use them and benefit and grow us food, that's a win all the way around. And it's pretty exciting in my mind that just this, these lowly plants, I feel like we could reverse climate change. And I know that's a bold statement to make, but this cycle of having cattle, you nip off the plants, and what that does is that makes those plants, they spring back to life, which means they're photosynthesis like crazy, so grabbing that carbon that they need. And so I like to be positive about, cattle in the environment. And the other thing that's so interesting about it is when those fields started getting healthier, and by healthier, I mean a wide range of plant species that are out there. But the first thing that came back was amphibians that I hadn't seen since I had gotten here. And, we had woodhouse toads, we have salamanders, we have tree frogs, we have all kinds of amphibians, and they're always kind of the canary in the coal mine, right, to tell you that you've got something wrong. So to see them come back with doing nothing other than not putting chemical inputs out there and seeding it into grasses was pretty exciting to me. And I think we're on the right track. I think we have a ways to go, but I think we're getting there.
One of the goals of cattle ranching is to get marketable cattle.
Yes.
Cattle that you can sell, that have good meat for the market.
That's right.
You saw some results in that direction too after you started paying attention to the health of soil.
Yep. They have good, healthy gut bacteria because it's the same bacteria that's in the soil. The microbes that are doing all the digesting and the ruminants, are already symbiotically related to these plants that are grown out here. I don't want to make it sound too complex because it kind of deters people from trying to wrap their minds around it. But it really is all symbiosis. And what happens, from my perspective, with those, chemical inputs that we put on the ground, it kills off those bacteria, fungi, everything in the soil, and then you don't get that, great relationships between the plants and those microbes. And so with the cattle specifically, we're seeing much higher weaning rates on the calves. One thing, and we can measure some of that, which is nice. So it's not just a sort of a sense of it. The butter fat in these cows' milk, even in the beef cow's milk, is way higher on these diverse pasture mixes that they're eating on out here. And so higher butter content in milk creates a bigger calf every time. And um, and that you just don't get if you're feeding hay or silage. And so there's that benefit. The moms are in such good condition that they breed back very well every year. So you get higher conception rates when the nutrients are high. And that's really important to your bottom line, to make sure that you get every one of those cows bred, because, that's a basically year-long process. And so if you get to the end of that year and you don't get a calf out of that cow, well, she's just cost you a bunch of money without giving back. And so being able to increase those is really important to your bottom line as a rancher. There's a lot of discussion, I'll say, around whether a grass finished calf, like that you take, that you slaughter, is, as people have opinions. Some people feel like grain finished is better beef, better tasting beef, and some people feel like the grass finished is better. And I think that they're both right. I think it's what you prefer. The taste is different. I definitely say that. So, but
And you've also said, I think, that people who have brought their cows to you and said, would you ranch these for us for a season, have come back again and again because they're seeing such good results.
yeah, they are. They have their own ground that they certainly could be running their cattle on. They're great ranchers, and it's the cattle prices are high right now, and high is a little bit of a relative term. It's they've been in the toilet for so long that now that we're getting a reasonable amount, it seems like it's high. But the economics are really shaking out on this, because those calves that they're selling on the market are 200 pounds heavier than they have been. And so it starts penciling out to pay me to custom graze their cattle for them. If it doesn't make economic sense, they're not going to do it, right? And so the fact that it's still penciling out for them is pretty exciting to me. And they're people that I really enjoy working with. And so I'm a little torn, because, I want their cattle to be back on their home ranches. One family came to us because their ranch burned and they didn't have anywhere to take their cattle, and now their ranch is in good condition again, but they're still here because it's making financial sense. So I don't know which one to root for.
What are the risks that you have to deal with raising cattle in this territory?
So we have a fairly high predator load as far as cougars and coyotes. I don't really worry about coyotes too much. I don't really consider them a predator that bothers the cattle, which people probably would argue with me with that. But the cougars certainly did. When we first got here, we were losing too many calves to cougars. And so I reached out to the Department of Fish and Wildlife and asked, what can I do about this? And they suggested getting livestock guardian dogs. And that has been a game changer for us. We did that, and they're great at their job, and we haven't lost livestock since we've had dogs on the place. 2 are Anatolian Shepherds and 2 are Maremmas, mostly. The Maremmas have some Anatolian Shepherd in them too. And then I have my herding dog, which is a Border Collie. We feel like for sure we always have to have 3 working dogs, to be fair to them, because cougars are big enough that it takes a couple of dogs to handle a cougar if they get in a tussle with one. And so don't want to send them out there alone. Don't think that's fair to them. We've had at any one time, I think we've had like 6 or 7 working livestock guardian dogs at a time.
And did you find that when you first started using the dogs that the cougar conflicts were constant?
Yeah, there was clearly a learning curve that needed to happen there, both with the cougars and with the dogs. And we were getting dogs coming back really pretty injured and patching them up and sending them right back out there. Um, but across time, obviously, that started calming down, and they started figuring out, because we still see cougars on this place, which is a goal of mine. That there's plenty of room for them, and so I'm glad that the dogs haven't run them off. But they've come to some sort of understanding with the dogs, because when the dogs tell them you're too close to the livestock, the cougars are like, okay, we got you, and they leave, and without the conflict between the two of them. And I feel like our original 3 dogs really blazed that trail for us. And so, like, the learning curves when we bring new dogs along, it's like it carries over across time with dogs. And so we haven't had those big injuries that we did with the original 3, because as we bring pups along, because we always have pups coming up through the ranks, being taught by the older dogs.
Have you and your husband had to lethally remove any cougars?
Oh my gosh, we tried once. I was so certain that as a wildlife biologist that I could call cougars in for him, and he had the hunting license, and so apparently my biology card didn't do me any good there. This country's really hard to hunt cougars in, because they can hear you and see you coming for a long ways away. So, most cougars in this country get hunted because somebody's deer hunting and they see a cougar and they have their cougar tag and they hunt it. So we were lousy at cougar hunting. I'm just going to be really clear with you about that. And I don't think our hearts were really in it either, with me being a biologist, and my husband is just a really compassionate guy, and it wasn't anything either of us wanted to do. So we're happy to leave that job to the dogs. But we did try.
So you feel like you've established some kind of equilibrium here at the ranch,
We
where
do.
the animals recognize each other's territory and what they're allowed to get away with.
Yep, that's exactly right. These dogs are not the kind of dogs that go and sit in the herd. They do at calving season, but that's the only time that you'll really see these dogs hanging out with the cattle. The rest of the time, we say that they're a perimeter dog. So they're going around the perimeter, making sure that the predators don't come down to where the livestock are. And that works really well.
Remind me what year it was that you and David came to own the ranch.
2011. Is that right? Yes, 2011.
So 13 years on the job here.
Yep.
Do you feel like you have adapted the ranch to what you want it to be, or are there still more changes or improvements you want to make?
I feel like I've just sort of arrived at our sweet spot. And what our sweet spot looks like is, I have to run this place by myself. So it has to be manageable. And I have to make enough money that we don't put personal finances into our ranch. And so it has to, pay for itself. And it does that now. I haven't drawn a salary yet. That's the next step. So it's just been sort of paying for itself. But I think I'm close to being able to draw a salary too, which after 13 years, we've always kept track of it. And I can't remember how much the ranch owes me in back salary, but it's a lot of money. We won't ever probably pay that back. But that's just really the honest, thing about agriculture, is that it's really hard to make a living at it when you are a small or mid-sized operator. So the cattle are now doing that, though, and that's pretty exciting to me.
You are, I think, in maybe your 5th year as a Fish and Wildlife Commissioner for the state.
Yep.
On the Department of Fish and Wildlife's
Right.
governing commission. What do you think you've learned or gained from your time on the ranch that you're able to take to those meetings in Olympia and bring to the table when policy's getting made?
Yeah, so weirdly, because I think of myself as not a people person. I spend weeks on the ranch totally by myself, and I'm perfectly happy with that. But I do think what I bring to the table there is the perspective of the human element, which from my perspective is, when people are struggling just to make ends meet, maybe wildlife issues aren't at the forefront of their worries, right? And so they may not show up to be well represented at the table. And I hope that I do a good job representing people who are too busy just trying to make a living, or couldn't possibly come to a commission meeting to come talk to us about what their needs are. And so I hope I represent that very quiet voice well, because what's interesting about that is rural Washingtonians are really, they're the ones that have the wildlife on their places, right? And so that's the public trust. And I think people don't consider how valuable just creating a place for wildlife to be. And they're paying their property taxes, which means they're paying to have wildlife on their private land. And I don't think we say out loud how valuable that is often enough, and that alone is a big enough give in my mind. That alone is, they are doing enough for wildlife just by keeping their place rural. And I think it's a little bit, I don't think they get appreciated for that, because then we ask them to do things like coexist with wolves, which is expensive. And so I hope that's what I bring. The other piece is also just the notion of private land. Um, it's very interesting how many people don't understand law behind private lands, right? Like you'll have people who have good intentions, but they want to be able to tell private landowners what to do on their land around wildlife. And it always seems like they seem rather surprised when it's like, oh no, you can't tell people how to manage their private lands, and unless they're breaking a law, So that has been a perspective that I think has been missing at that table. I think those are my two main things.
Working on the ranch, running the ranch isn't your first go round with land management. You
No.
worked for, was it the Park Service previously?
I worked for U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and we managed national wildlife refuges. And specifically, I managed Convoy Lake National Wildlife Refuge, which is at the base of Mount Adams, and a beautiful, beautiful little wildlife refuge to visit, by the way. It's sort of a hidden gem. So that, thank goodness I did that. I've always, because I came from a farm and then I stepped into that role of U.S. Fish. I've always managed land, and I feel like I have a good understanding of what that really means, expense-wise, or just the level of work that's required. People think if land is just sitting, that there's no work or money that goes into it, and that couldn't be farther from the truth.
So you had that experience trying to manage a landscape in equilibrium. You've come here and tried to bring this landscape into equilibrium. But what do you think running this ranch has taught you that you didn't know coming into it?
Oh my gosh, so many things. I think what it taught me is how to be an independent, critical thinker, and that has served me well on every aspect of my life. When something breaks, you can't just throw up your hands and say, I'm going to wait around until somebody comes and fixes this for me, because there ain't nobody coming to fix it for you, right? And so like just being very clever and resourceful, and the thing that I think all agriculture teaches anybody who's in it is just sheer resiliency and determination. Because when you are, I mean, it could be any, emergencies don't happen between the hours of 8 and 5. It's always at some horrible time when you're supposed to be going to a wedding or, something. And it can be very demoralizing if you don't just have this like inner strength to get you through that. But the critical thinking, you have to learn to anticipate what could go wrong and then solve that problem before it goes wrong. Every day, every minute.
I lived in the Wenatchee Valley for 25 years. I had never visited Douglas County Coulee country until today. Didn't know thing one about ranching. If you were having to explain what you do to somebody like me without having the ranch here
Yep.
as an example to show, how would you describe your job?
Well, that's changed over the years. I now kind of think of myself as a grass farmer, actually, and the cattle are just my harvesters of it. How do I describe it? I think it's hard to describe it. I raise cattle, and no, I really think grass. I raise grass in that cattle harvest. I think that if I had to make it succinct, that's what I would say I do now.
You've got a big lawn, but you don't have to mow it.
That's right. The trick is though that also entails animal husbandry. Another piece that I'm really proud of that I've worked really hard is my stockmanship skills, which is how I handle the cattle, how to move them, because I'm by myself with my dog, and so I have to be able to move 300 head of cows wherever I want them to go. And I go to workshops every year and really work hard on that, because if I make a mistake and I've got cattle all over the place, it's just me. Well, sometimes, as you saw, I drag my poor husband into too, and he helps me, but it's mostly up to me to fix whatever messes I make. And so but had to learn how to castrate cattle and all the veterinary stuff. I feel like I am really skillful. Sometimes you'll have birthing problems, and I feel like I've really gained a good skill set of learning how to deal with those problems when they don't arise very often, but when they do, I can usually deal with it.
Do you invite visitors to the ranch? Do you have people who come out curious to know how it goes?
I do. I'm a little torn on that because it's just me, and people really have great intentions, and they're like, we're going to come out and help you. And it's not safe, a lot of things, for me to just let people who don't know what they're doing to help. And a lot of equipment gets broken when I have helpers out. But at the same time, I'm willing for it to be an open book. Like, I'm proud of everything I'm doing here. So it's not a matter of not wanting people to come out here and seeing. It's just a time management issue. And so I've actually thought about doing sort of an open house a couple of times a year so people can come out and see what we do out here. And so that only sort of 2 days are taken up. Because the other thing about the commission, as you brought up, is I work on commission stuff like 20 or 30 hours a week. And so time management is just, and a lot of people want to talk to me about that. And so I have people who want to talk to me about the ranch, and I have people who don't want to talk to me about commission. And so I'm on the phone a lot. And that's been hard to manage.
What's your favorite spot on the ranch?
I've got a couple of favorite spots. I have one called the amphitheater, and it's an amphitheater of basalt, columnar basalt, and you just go in there and it's just peace and quiet. And the cattle rarely go in there, and so it's just pristine. That's probably my favorite spot. I love this whole place though. And I I love watching the cattle on this place, and you'll see me take a beer out there and just go sit in the evening and just hang out with the cows and watch them and what they're doing and what they're eating and interested in, and I love that too. But this place never gets old for me. I tell people I get tired, but I never get tired of it.
It's a geologically interesting spot too. So, do you have much in the way of geologically enthusiastic people coming out to say, "Can I crawl around in the basalt for a while?"
Yes, yes. So Nick on the Rocks,
Nick Zentner.
yes, he has been out, and we have a formation in one of our caves that we've had, I believe, 7 geologists come out and look, and they all gave 7 different interpretations of what it is and why it formed and all of that. And um, there's a lot. This place just generates curiosity. One thing that we've had to deal with that's new is drones. People fly their drones over us a lot and from the road. So I don't, my husband, what he's got his drone license and the whole 9 yards. I don't know what the legalities of that are, but it's a little weird sometimes. But this place really ignites people's imaginations, and it ignites mine so I can understand that. And at the same time, sometimes it drives me insane what people choose to do out here.
Do you ever get sort of swallowed up by the sense of not just human history, but natural history?
Every single day. It's, yeah, that's a great question. It just, this place is so ancient feeling. It just feels ancient, and it is ancient. And even the peoples that were here before us, not on the ranch as far as I know, but Clovis tools were found adjacent to the ranch, which dates human history to past 10,000 years. And so this place has been occupied by people for 10,000 years, and maybe longer. And so I know I'm a blip on the radar screen. And what I feel just so, I think probably my strongest passion is I can't screw this place up, right? Like this isn't for me to wreck. And so what not wrecking it looks like to me is not selling it off, not parceling it up, keeping it intact. And I'm proud, and in keeping land intact is really complicated. For example, we have solar companies and wind companies come to us monthly, literally monthly. They come to our door and they offer us money that, you know, at some point in time it becomes life-changing money. The numbers keep getting higher and higher. And so it's like fending off, pushing back on that. No, you know, we're not interested. Our interest is keeping this place intact. And I just feel like that is my sole responsibility so that it's here. I think I feel deeply that it's a special place, and I'm not willing to carve it up. And at the same time, my life expectancy is only so long. We don't have kids. And so I know that in the future, you know, that when it's out of my hands because I'm dead and sprinkled ashes out here, you know, that might still happen. But on my watch, I'm going to keep it intact.
Well, is there anything I didn't ask about that you think people should know about KV Ranch or what you've tried to do here?
I think that, you know, it's tough. So one thing that I worry about a lot is that I've done things pretty outside the norms, and I have a farming background, but I don't have a ranching background. And I don't think that I have done a very good job of honoring ranch, like historical ranching culture very well. I do things pretty weird. And I always want to be really careful that because I'm doing things in a strange way, that's not to say that I'm right and the old way of doing things is wrong. That's what's right for me because I'm here, I'm by myself, and I have to be able to manage things by myself. And so I think I have sort of turned some other ranchers, I'm a newcomer. I do things weird. And I think I've probably alienated some ranching families then by saying like, this is the way to do it. This is the way you should do it. And I want to be really clear that, this is the way to do it for me in this spot. And I the ranching culture I think is just really important and a really beautiful thing. And I don't want to do anything or say anything to sort of negate that in any way. And yeah, so I do worry about that a little bit.
But it's not all Yellowstone. We've determined that.
Oh my gosh. Even those traditional ranchers would say it's nothing like, the biggest problem with Yellowstone is they've got money.
Yeah.
We could go yeehawing around all day too if we had money. But you have to make these places, these big old places, pay for themselves. And that really that's tough to do for sure.
I know I saw a bull knock a steer into a water tank today, so I feel like I've seen ranch life.
You certainly did, yes. And as I always say, we could have nice things, but
But we have bulls instead.
But we do, yeah.
Molly Linville with KV Ranch, thanks a lot for letting us come out and join you today.
Oh, thank you very much. It's been so much fun.
You're watching the NCWLIFE channel.